What if the reason that your calling feels like suffocation is perhaps because you're trying to birth it from the wrong womb, creating from anxiety instead of anointing? Or you might even be building something while you're hemorrhaging peace. Maybe that work ethic that you are so proud of that just represents your integrity is actually pain disguised as productivity. We are trying to perform and to earn our way into something when actually we are children of promise. And in proper timing, those things will come into fruition without our striving necessary. Now, the difference between these two isn't just theological. This is the difference between creative burnout and creative flourishing, between doing work that drains you and work that fulfills you. And today I want to expose why perhaps your most spiritual hustle might be the most dangerous rebellion. And I'm going to show you what creative freedom looks like when we stop performing for God and start collaborating with Him. Now, this is either going to offend your work ethic or it's going to liberate you. So let's find out which. I'm Hagar, and I love to champion women toward radically delicious lives of spiritual freedom, creativity, and joy in spite of circumstances, not because of them. But in that, there is a very specific key. It is the joy of God or the joy of the Lord. And that's a very specific brand of joy. It's a kind of joy that cannot be bought and it cannot be produced by any sort of human effort. And recognizing that is something that opened up a whole can of worms for me when it comes to doing creative work. Now, if you're anything like me, doing anything creative is something that just gives you an injection of joy. It's this happy place. It's this blissful place. And also, that's where I connect with God the most. But, and this is a really big but, I have often messed with that space. I have tainted it, and I have even violated that treasure because I have been living like a slave girl, pretending to be a daughter. Because of unexamined hurt and because of these little pain cords that were puppeteering my life, I became addicted to striving, particularly in my creative work. And I would dare say that if you are exhausted right now, if you are feeling like you've over maximized your life, you have no margin for anything, this is likely why. So let's talk about these two little gals that represent completely different operating systems. First, we have Sarah. She is the free woman. She is the wife of Abraham. And yes, she receives this promise from God, even though she is super old. And God says, you're going to have a son. Now, all logic would clearly laugh in her face. And then we have Hagar. She is the slave woman. Now, she is the assistant of Sarah. She is her servant. When Sarah got impatient, when Sarah was like, this promise seems absolutely illogical, she brings in Hagar and says, here, you fulfill this because clearly I can't. And here's what most people miss about this story. Hagar is not the villain. She is not the bad guy. She is just the symptom. She just represents what happens when we panic in the waiting, when we forget, when we doubt. Well, I'm just going to DIY it. I'm going to do it myself because you know what? God probably has a lot more things to do. Because Sarah couldn't understand or couldn't see how this promise was going to come through and how it was going to come to fruition, she decided, you know what? Let's just do it ourselves. Let's just figure this out. So here you go, Abraham, sleep with Hagar. That way we can have a child, right? And we'll just force his promise into existence through our own human effort. And the moment that Hagar became pregnant, the entire household flipped upside down in chaos and imploded. There was jealousy, there was contempt, there was envy, there was distrust, there was exhaustion, all kinds of nasty drama going down in that house. Whatever we birth in striving, we have to maintain and sustain in striving. There's no grace or faith holding it up. It's only our striving, our anxiety, our trying harder till we burn out. Eventually, you end up hating this thing that you once loved. Now, this happened to me personally, and I'll tell you about it in a moment. But in this particular case, we have Paul in Galatians 4, and he's telling us about this story. And he's basically saying these are two ways of living, and particularly two different ways in which we can see God and His role in our life. And the question that's going to determine whether you burn out or whether you flourish is which operating system are you running on? So let's see what living like Hagar actually looks in day-to-day life. And I'm going to use my own personal example because I want it to be really tangible. So I would wake up, and before my feet even hit the ground, I would start already thinking about oh my gosh, I haven't done enough. I should have done more. I should be further by now. If I would have done, then I would have done this, then I would have accomplished that, then I would have, and I always felt like I was falling behind. I am someone that really cherishes rest. I like to reboot, refresh. I would start feeling guilty. And I would be like, there's so much to do. There are so many more things you could be doing right now. This is lazy. This is an inappropriate use of your time. And even when it was good things, I would start thinking, oh, there's so many more people you could be helping right now. There are so many more things you could be doing. And then what would happen is that my resting would become more of numbing than actually resting. Because if you're resting and you have this little inner tyrant that's like, you should be doing more, and it's like whipping you into shape and punishing you, the last thing you want to do is even rest because the voice gets louder. So what do? You need to numb so that the little tyrant can go to sleep. Every creative project that I did then became a competition. It became an audition to see, does God trust me? And so what would happen if the results didn't pan out the way that I wanted them, the way that I expected them? Immediately I would shrink back into this little pity party of, you know what? God has his favorites and I'm not one of them. Now, this is particularly a narrative that I've learned to believe because it's something that before knowing God, I actually knew about my father, about my earthly father. So I projected that onto God, and immediately when doors would close, I was like, evidence. Clearly, God has his favorites. I'm not one of them. Clearly, God trusts other people. He doesn't trust me. And that was always this revolving punishment that was going on in the back of my mind, my heart, and my spirit. I would actually even get jealous or envious of people who seemed to be effortless and things would just happen for them and doors would just seem to open. There's just showing up, doing your work, and allowing God to do the rest. But I knew that about other people, and I somehow didn't think I had access to that, or I didn't have rights to that. So I started grinding myself. Naturally, what this does is it gives you the illusion of control. All of a sudden you think, well, if I do this, I get this. Again, this is a relentless tyrant that doesn't let you rest. And here's the creepiest, most insidious part of this thing, is that when you can manage results and you start getting that and it's tangible, it's something you can hold in your hands, something you can measure, all of a sudden you start liking that more than the sort of nebulous aspect of waiting for God. What happens is that this striving masquerades itself as obedience. That was extremely pain-induced fear that was driving me to do things that appeared to be successful and productive. I'm just being responsible was actually in the background. You know what? I don't trust God to come through with this, so let me just do it myself because that is something I can count on. And that was my death fear. Now, our death fear isn't the fear of dying. Our death fear is that thing that we just can't bear. So the fact that God wouldn't come through with something was my death fear. What would happen if he didn't? Then I wouldn't get validation. Then I wouldn't have succeeded at something. Then I would have looked like a failure. And so I personally did what Paul was warning the people about in Galatians 4:8-9, where he says, formerly, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not God's. But now that you know God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you're turning back to those weak and miserable forces? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? Before having a relationship with Jesus and actually being a daughter of God, I was just a daughter of a single mom, of a woman who wouldn't take no for an answer. She said she was going to do it and she would do it. She was an immigrant from Venezuela and came to the United States and made all her dreams come true. So that was my mold, is, you know what? You want to do something, you simply do it yourself. And here's what I didn't notice as a kid that I noticed later on in life. There's a fine print that says, and you will kill yourself in the process. But here's the thing. Once I came to know God, it was like, okay, I don't have to do this myself. Once God has placed something for you, you just abide and things will come to fruition in due time. And so God gave me a clear vision. He gave me a very clear direction. It was this thing called Dysfunction Magazine. And it was a magazine that I did for almost 10 years, maybe a little bit longer. The doors would start to open. He was just giving me all the pieces. And I felt like I was always just one step behind God. He would show me and then I would move. And then he would show me and I would move. And so in these early days, even though I didn't even have $1 to my name, he was opening up doors. People that were just coming, that normally these large established magazines have to have all these departments and all these people in place. God just started opening up those doors in ways that I couldn't even begin to imagine how to even do them on my own. So then the magazine started to grow organically and it started to distribute wider. And I remember the day when we got access to be distributed at Barnes & Noble booksellers. I remember it was like dreams. I was like, how could this be happening? But it's like with anything, right? Okay, cool, moving on to the next thing. So we started expanding even more. So God was just doing this supernatural work. But here's the thing. When things start opening up and things start unfolding, you still start to get more and more ambitious. Not that ambition is a bad thing. And when I'm talking about ambition, I'm not necessarily talking about money or status. I'm talking about you still want growth and growth because you know that the goalpost changes. And so what happened is that then I started to have higher and higher expectations, which, if I was really honest with you, I would say they were internal demands. And then that old mode started to kick right back in. So my standards started to become so intense that although we had only been around for like a year or two, I was like, we should be like Vogue. We need to have these kinds of advertisers. And if we don't have those, then we're obviously failing. That little inner tyrant started calling the shots again and was saying, Huguette, if you don't do this, you're failing. Your mind is always going to find a way to rationalize why you should do whatever that little tyrant is telling you to do. So here I was with a good heart, right? With a good mission, right? Yeah, questionable. Now there were demands. And when those demands weren't being met, all of a sudden I was like, I don't know about this provider though. I don't know about God meeting these needs. It looks like he's not. Because all of a sudden my standards had changed. This thing was no longer a God vision. Now it was the Huguette trophy. And notice how our heart can shift when we have undealt with hurt inside that starts to then call the shots. So I hustled, I built strategies, I did all the things. And now all of a sudden I was creating things that were performing for others instead of serving others as I had originally intended. So God gave me this vision. Clearly, I must do everything in my human effort to force this thing into reality. And you know what? It kind of worked most of the time. We arrived in more visibility, more traction, more success, more levels, but I was losing every fiber of joy. I was losing the thing that kept me going. I started to emotionally and mentally flatline, and my heart just wasn't in it anymore. And as I said before, and it's true of the Hagar mode, is that whatever you build with sweat, you have to maintain in sweat. And then, as is his iconic style, God said something that completely wrecked me. Huguette, you are my daughter. You are not my slave. I don't need you to strive. I need your trust. And I need your patience, and I need you to stay close to me. And what's really interesting is that the more I hustled and the more that I was striving on my own, the further and further I would get from God. I'd been so obsessed with producing the promise that I completely forgot that it's something that you receive and not something that you produce. See, I was performing and auditioning for a father who had already given me an inheritance. But the problem is that I was allergic to waiting. And on some level, I still struggle with that a little bit, but that has roots, and maybe it has for you as well. See, when I was a kid, my dad abandoned my mom and I. And so we used to live in Venezuela, and there was one year where he told my mom and I to just come to the United States, and he said, go to Miami, I'm gonna meet you guys there. I'm gonna take care of some things, I'm gonna tie some loose ends, and after just a few weeks, I'll meet you guys there. So we went ahead and we did that. My mom and I left to Miami, and then a month passed. And then we would stay in contact, and he would talk to us, and he was like, yeah, I'm selling a few things. I'm doing some more things around here. And the months would continue passing and passing. And after almost like a year, he finally told my mom and I, I'm not coming. That event marked my life more than I'd like to admit. I can't trust waiting for things. Waiting equals looking stupid. And if you can't hold it, it's not real and it's not coming. So that's what I learned to engrave into my heart at that moment. And if you struggle with patience like I do, the crazy thing is that impatience usually yields idolatry. Because whatever that thing is that you're waiting for, if you're not waiting with the right heart stance, that thing becomes your idol, as it did for Sarah. Once Sarah had been given a promise, her inability to have complete patience and trust that God was going to do this made her become obsessed with motherhood. All idols require human sacrifice. And that it did for Sarah as well. Who was the human sacrifice? Hagar was. And maybe even herself, because I don't think anybody would be like, here, husband, take this girl because I can't give you any kids. There was just a violation of an internal moral code, of an emotional code, simply because she thought, in order for me to have this thing, I have to violate myself and I have to violate someone else in order to make that happen. Now, Sarah was 90 years old when Isaac was born. Now, when she was about to get pregnant, her body was like, no, girl, sorry, you missed your window. We are done. Her logic said, you know what? This promise expired decades ago. But God said, let me do this. Watch me do something extraordinary and supernatural. And when Isaac arrived, It was so easy. No striving, just pure promise, pure enjoyment, everything as it should be. There is no clause. There's no but. Now, granted, she did have to show up. This isn't, again, some passive thing where we just kind of sit around and I'll do nothing. No, she still had to show up. Her and poor Abe, they were decrepit. Their bodies were like giving out. I mean, I don't really want to think about that, but I think about that sometimes and I'm like, who wants to be doing anything at that age? I mean, their pelvic bones are like cracking and they're just like, they're being like, what is going on? But yes, they did. That was them showing up. That's it. God did the rest. So here are some recommendations on how to live this out practically. The first one is just do the clear thing that God told you last. Just that, nothing more. What is the last thing that God said to you? What did he ask you to do? Stop creating your own assignments. Stop trying to open doors that God has literally locked shut simply because you don't want to wait. And if you're thinking, Huguette, I don't even know what the heck you're talking about. I don't know what was the last thing that God told me. Or you're having trouble discerning God's voice over your anxious thoughts or your fearful thoughts, then I've created something called the Intentional Life Bundle, and it is a free resource that you can download below. There are things that God wants us to produce. There are things that he's already set in place for us to accomplish in our lives and ways in which we will thrive and flourish. But here's the thing, he's not going to fast forward that process or that methodology simply because our pain cords are so insistent. If he did fast forward the process as we sometimes wish he did, that would actually be cruelty, because what happens to a branch that's flimsy, that's still growing, and you put a big fat fruit at the end of it? It's going to break. And so part of my development as a branch has been God revealing and healing some of those wounds from my childhood, because at some point these wounds and then this design and this calling that God had for my life started to get entangled. And when those things are entangled, we don't know what is the motive behind what we're doing. And so I actually started to, from my dad's actions, and I started to project that on God. So anytime that there were waiting periods while God was just operating in the process, the healthy process, I actually took that as, oh, you know what? God is rejecting me too. My second recommendation is to wait for what God promised in joyful anticipation. Now, I know that sometimes waiting feels passive, or it feels irresponsible, or it feels like we're wasting time. So I want you to think about it this way. Waiting on God is not passive at all. It's actually the most aggressive action we can take against unnecessary delay. So imagine you're trying to cut a tree and you have a really dull axe and you're just going this for about 10 hours to try to chop this tree. If you actually take that time and you start sharpening your axe, it might take you hours to sharpen the axe. It might even take you 2 hours. But the moment you take that really sharp axe and you try to cut that tree, you might actually cut it down in 30 minutes. So yes, the sharpening maybe took 2 hours that you might have preferred not, because you would think it's a waste of time, but it was actually the thing that made the moment of action the most lethal. It made it the most effective. And that's why God actually doesn't really take very long. It's usually the development process, and then once he says, okay, it's time, and he sends us to do something, things just open. And so I want you to keep that in mind. Now, my third recommendation is let God open the doors. Because when he invites you into something, that invitation carries the advocacy that you need to have the support and the backing when you go through the doors. Make sure you recognize that God's advocacy is in all the places where the anointing is. That's where the doors open, and that's where the work becomes more seamless and less effort required. Because when God opens a door for you, it's basically something that has your name on it and no one can take it away from you. And so you don't have to strive to maintain it. David didn't have to hustle his way into becoming king. Esther didn't have to manipulate her way and strategize her way into royalty. God positioned them. And when God positions you, no one can take you out of that place. What God initiates, he sustains. What you manufacture, you maintain. And the waiting, my friend, the waiting is just helping you practice the stance of freedom. Because while you're waiting, you actually get to just enjoy. And why does he do this? Because once you do have the open doors, all of a sudden we start believing that having that responsibility now means we can no longer play, we can no longer be children. And what this waiting does is it reminds us that we are at all times his children. and we are to enjoy the freedom of being his child. Lest we believe once we get that role or that position that all of a sudden we are now burdened with this leadership role and we are no longer a child. That is the big danger in sometimes being promoted too quickly. And see, while waiting might feel like depletion because we get kind of exhausted and like, oh, I hate waiting, mostly because we're usually doing stuff while we're quote unquote waiting. Driving is depletion itself masquerading as advancement. It's kind of like if you have a layover flight and you just stay by the gate, you're staring at the gate, you're frustrated at the gate. Well, really, you could be going to get something to eat, grabbing a little coffee, getting in a little lounge chair, reading a good book. You could just be enjoying yourself. But it's how we choose to enjoy and how we choose to, again, be this child that enjoys the perks of their daddy while they wait. God's not asking you to love the layover. He's not like, oh yes, that's going to be such a fun time. No, what he's saying is, let me love you and let me refresh you in it, because in it, I'm pampering you. In Genesis 21, we see that when Isaac, the real child of promise, was born, all of a sudden Ishmael began to mock and make fun of Isaac consistently. So what will happen is that that thing that you forced into existence will eventually become hostile to that thing which God wants to do and that thing which God is going to bring to fruition out of promise. And your self-made success will block the space where the supernatural is designed to do its work. So here is the delicious fiesta that you get to RSVP to today. You can stop trying to force doors open because your daddy has the keys. Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Now, one thing that's really interesting about leaning, when you think about leaning, and we do that a lot here because there's a lot of rock walls and you're trying to kind of go from like one tide pool to the other. Sometimes you have to kind of lean on the rock. When you lean on those rock walls, you can't actually depend on your own balance anymore. It's literally impossible. So once you lean on something, your entire weight is on that thing, which means that if you're leaning on God, you cannot, by definition, you cannot lean on your own understanding. That means you don't have to do anything to figure things out, to strategize, to understand the blueprint. All you have to do is follow the leading of God. So let me ask you, what are you trying to strive? What are you trying to birth in human effort that God is actually maybe wanting to deliver supernaturally? I'd love you to answer in the comments below. What is one thing that maybe you feel you're trying to force? And remember, you are given a golden ticket. You are given permission to enjoy because you're going to have to wait anyway. So you might as well wait joyfully and anticipating the deliciousness that he's already put in place for you. And if this video freed something in you, something unlocked inside of you, then consider subscribing because that way you'll be notified when my next video comes out in the next 2 weeks. And also, if you learned something today, then would you consider hitting the like button so that way you get other things that are related to this topic. And also, if you want to grow deeper with myself and other creative women, then make sure to join the Delicious Life community, which I'm linking below as well, where I share weekly encouragements and just different things to chew on and meditate on, ways to get closer to God and ways to do it tangibly, objectively, and simply. All right, beautiful, that's all for today. But as usual, it is an honor and a pleasure to serve you. Mwah.